but none of the things that her mother has taught her has really impacted the townsfolk so much as just the rumor of her name, her ill-fated name being the last name of Weyward. Her ill-fated name being that of Weyward. It was kind of the ideal location for summer vacation they had. that rhymes too much. Welcome back to my channel. If you've been here before, if you're new, it's great to have you here. I read 10 books last month and they have a really good variety as far as genres go. So the last book that I read in May is a early reader middle grade novel. It is called Lone Wolf and the author's name is Raeca Klassen. I initially was introduced to this book through her mom's booktube channel, but her daughter completely wrote, she illustrated the cover for this book. It is all her work and she is a young teenager. I think she might be 12 or 13, that's my guess. And it's really impressive because it's a short book, but it has a lot of chapters. If you're a kid and you want to feel like you're making progress, I think having lots of little chapters like this can be really encouraging. So our main character that we're following is Hugo, and Hugo has grown up in foster care. As he's settling into a new home with the Collins family, he's not really ready to put names on things, so he's reluctant to call it his home. He instead calls it the Collins house. And even his pillow isn't his yet. His room isn't his. His PlayStation isn't his. So he still feels kind of reluctant to put ownership on those things because over his past, everything has kind of been temporary and borrowed. We follow him through chaotic breakfast table in the morning to the early morning paper routes with grumpy new sister, and he cheers them on. And so he acts in every respect like he is like a new and older brother to these kids, but he isn't quite sure if they accept him yet, so he considers himself a lone wolf. He still feels a little insecure, a little out of place, but the Collins family is kind of so wild and wonderful that Hugo can't help but suspect that he might be at home in this new family. This is a really sweet story. It's very short. I think it could work for multiple grade levels, and content-wise, there's really nothing that you need to be worried about. I mentioned at the beginning, the author herself is a young teen, and so if you happen to have an aspiring writer in your house, you should probably get them this book, even if it's just to spark that idea that they don't have to wait until they're a certain age to put their stories out in the world. And I think that's the really incredible thing about this, is that she worked to put the story out there and it exists now in real life, so that's so cool. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars, and the half a star is just for a little bit of polishing on the editing end. I think that it just needs like a little bit of magic in that respect and it would be absolutely perfect, but you still shouldn't be hesitant to pick it up at this date. I think that it's wonderful. It really emphasizes one of the things that I said when I started my channel, which is it's better done than perfect. And the extra level of that phrase, it's better done than perfect, is that your work, your art, your story is better out in the world at like 80% or 90% than hiding inside or never completed at 100%. So get your stuff out there, like try new things, be brave, and see what happens. So that's one of the things, I just wanted to celebrate that. Yeah, Lone Wolf, you can find a copy on Amazon if you're interested, and it's very affordable and it'll get to your door in no time. This next book is a historical fiction that I have honestly picked up and put down so many times that I finally decided last month I was going to read it or unhaul it. And that book is The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams. And see, I do have tabs in here. I did have thoughts. This story is told from the perspective of Esme. Esme is the daughter of a lexicographer, which if you needed a dictionary to look that up, you're on the right track, because lexicographers collect and define words for inclusion in a dictionary. So Esme's father, along with other scholars, are working on the production of the first Oxford English Dictionary. As Esme grows up from a little girl, we find her underneath the sorting table where the work on the dictionary has begun. So at the sorting table are many little strips of words with their definitions. If there are words that are considered extemporary, or they decide that because the words haven't been actually written down and published anywhere, they're just a turn of phrase, they don't want them to be included, those words are discarded. And so our story really begins when Esme finds one of those discarded words on the floor and she saves it. So she saves a lost word. And she decides to make that a habit. She decides to start collecting the words that are discarded or lost, while these men are deliberating on the inclusion of words that they believe will be the nurturing of an educated society of the future. Esme is collecting the words that she believes belong to the women. Meanwhile, Esme's world is on the verge of sweeping changes, with women fighting for the right to vote and a great war looming. But can the elevation of lost words help Esme rise above her societal expectations and also lift up the voices of the other women that she encounters in her life? One aspect of this story that I really enjoyed was how the words that Esme uncovered were directly connected to a life circumstance that she was about to undergo, or people that she was about to talk to. So we had this kind of secondary connection point to whatever word she found, and then a story that happened shortly after. Something that made me a little uncomfortable about this story, and it was probably intentional, was that even though we're in a time of change when women are fighting for the right to vote, and Esme is kind of inspired and caught up into all of that, she never really considers how she personally can impact the life of someone in her own home, and that would be the housekeeper, Lizzie, who cannot read, she's not educated, and her expectation in life is pretty much just to serve Esme and her family until she is too old to be able to do so anymore. And I felt kind of conflicted about how the author addressed that or didn't address that situation, because these two women very clearly become friends. Lizzie basically steps in and fills the role of both a mother and an older sister to Esme throughout the story. Esme doesn't really consider how she can impact the life of Lizzie. In my Goodreads review, in fact, I decided not to write a full-length review. I saved that for these now, but I just said, why didn't Esme teach Lizzie to read? Because that seemed like the simplest thing that she could have done to just open up her world a little bit, but she didn't even try to do that. Some pretty tough themes in this book, and they come with their own set of trigger warnings. So it includes teen pregnancy, and there's talk of abortion, which in that time period was definitely a lot more dangerous to the lives of the mothers. So I would say definitely look into the trigger warnings before you give this a read. I think it is pretty historically accurate, in my opinion. If you don't want to step into those subject matters, then it's okay to pass on this one. Overall, I feel like I did spend a significant amount of time with at least two of the characters in Esme and Lizzie, and I appreciate the message of this story. It just wasn't a favorite. I'm glad that I finally read it through, and I gave it 3.5 stars. The next book that I read had some similar themes to the Dictionary of Lost Words, but a little bit more witchy vibes. And I know that if you watched my previous video, you're going to recognize the cover of this one, because that is Weyward by Amelia Hart. In 2019, Kate flees the prison of an abusive relationship to move into an abandoned cottage that is her inheritance from a great aunt that she barely remembers. When she moves into the cottage, she finds the garden overgrown and the house a little bit run down, but she decides to stay there because it is her one safe place remaining, other than going home to her parents. She's not quite ready to tell them about the circumstances of her relationship. As I mentioned, the cottage is run down, it needs a lot of work, but Kate suspects that it contains secrets of her great aunt's life. In 1619, Altha is being held for trial for the murder of a cattle farmer who was trampled to death by his herd. The circumstances were mysterious, it was dramatic. The townspeople immediately suspect Altha because she's one in a family of people that had suspicious behavior. When she was little, Altha's mother introduced her to a kind of magic that is tied to the natural world in the form of listening to insects, plants, and talking to animals. But none of the things that her mother has taught her has really impacted the townsfolk so much as just the rumor of her name being that of Weyward. In 1942, in the midst of World War II, Violet is imprisoned in her own home because of societal expectations. Her mother, who is long since dead, was rumored to have gone mad before she died, and all that Violet has to remember her by is a locket and the name Weyward that was scratched in the baseboard of her bedroom. As I mentioned, this story has very similar themes to the Dictionary of Lost Words. The difference between those two books is pretty stark because we linger in the discomfort of those situations much more than we did in the Dictionary of Lost Words. In the Dictionary of Lost Words, those moments that change the trajectory of our main character's life, they kind of happen and then we're left with to deal with the consequences. In this book, we kind of see them coming from miles away and we're left to sit there until it finally happens and then the consequences unfold. So I will say for that reason, as well as some repeated themes from the Dictionary of Lost Words that are a little bit more graphic, I couldn't safely recommend Weyward to just any reader. Again, Weyward has some pretty strong feminist themes. I would say it leans a lot more toward magical realism than fantasy, in my opinion. As I was giving you the kind of details of each character, I'm sure you saw similar themes of imprisonment, expectation, and suspicion. And I think that's the overall message we're meant to take from this. I gave Weyward 3 stars. On to more lighter, happier reading. Let's talk about a murderous robot who is actually warm and fluffy. That is Murderbot by Martha Wells. If you're a fan of Star Wars or maybe even Star Trek, I think that there's a good chance that you will like these books. Put simply, we're following a security android, so part robot, part human, and they are programmed to protect on behalf of the company that they are hired out to. In this case, it is kind of a startup company, and our main character is this security bot. Just a sec unit is the short name for it. And it's following these group of scientists to an unknown planet, a distant planet, to conduct some research about the life forms that exist there and the kinds of resources that they might be able to use or test on that land. And when they get there, there's some surprises that they didn't anticipate, there's some things that weren't on the map, and the sec unit kind of has to make its own calls, which normally it wouldn't be allowed to do because the company provides something called a governor chip to the androids, kind of limits the number of choices that the android can make because everything that they're doing is on behalf of their client. It has to follow a set of rules and instructions that have been pre-programmed into it. Except this android has a broken governor chip, and so they don't have to comply with any of the things that it is originally designed to do. Rather, it can make its own calls, it can express its own desires, and that's kind of what makes Murderbot unique. So the expectation for Murderbot by its makers and by its client is to follow its instructions, to do what it's told. But in reality, what we have is an android who likes to watch streaming television shows in the back of their mind while they're processing other tasks, kind of wants to be an introvert and ignore the rest of the people in the crew, and generally kind of keep to themselves, which is really humorous to read, especially in the midst of it troubleshooting and problem solving with the team of scientists. It's really humorous. So it isn't necessarily like following a character in another story, following a superhuman computer, and the android describes all of the different things that it checks on and does in a way that you would expect a computer program to do. So if you're not really into that, you might hate it, but for me, I really loved that. I thought that was awesome. And the personalities of the different robots or different programmed beings that we meet in this world are also really cool. Artificial Condition, which is book 2, when we're introduced to a transport ship named Art. And Art is very snarky. He is very smart. He kind of becomes the voice in Murderbot's ear, so to speak, when he's going off to inspect some things. So I can't say enough about this series. I think it's worth a try. Each of these stories is also very short. They are novellas. They are not full-length sci-fi novels. So if you're thinking about giving the genre a try, that could be a nice foot in the door for you as well. I think my reviews for each of the 3 novellas was a little bit different. I believe I gave the first book 3.5 stars, book 2 4 stars, and book 3 3.5 stars again. But overall, I would say the series is a 5 for me so far. And I'm excited to continue with it this month. So my next book has a completely different vibe, and that is The Lonely Hearts Book Club by Lucy Gilmore. And this book kind of matches the cover quite well. It's very colorful, it's very light and fluffy, it's kind of like watching a Hallmark movie. In The Lonely Hearts Book Club by Lucy Gilmore, we're following Sloane, who is a librarian that loves her job. And she wouldn't necessarily call herself lonely. She has a fiance, she's going to be married, and she has her coworkers at the library that she sees fairly regularly. But she doesn't really have any friends or dreams outside of that. One day at the library, she meets a grumpy old patron in the form of Arthur, and Arthur kind of rebuffs Sloane's offer to help him find some books, and they start up this bookish banter until one day when Arthur doesn't show up at the library and Sloane decides to find out what happened to him. So she looks into where he lives, which is against the rules in libraries. So she gets fired from her job and she goes off to find him, and it turns out that he's not in great health, he needs some help around the house, and he has kicked out every nurse that has come to his door. So when Sloane offers to help care for his needs, with also the ruse of helping him catalog his massive library in his house, he reluctantly agrees. So we get to meet more characters, and before too long, there's a book club where people are not just talking about books, but they're talking about what they meant to them because of what happened in their lives. It's really fluffy. If you love a good Hallmark movie, or you just like books where characters from different experiences can bond together over books, I think you will really love this book. I found myself skimming through this book because not much was happening. It's very character-based. It didn't have what I was looking for at the time. I did pick this up before having read 2 of the 3 books that they discuss in their book club. So fair warning, they talk about The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, and Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery. So it's warm and cozy if you're looking for that type of read. It wasn't what I was in the mood for at the time, maybe because I'm enjoying sci-fi worlds and fantasy so much more lately, but it was still a good read, and I would recommend it if you like books that are more character-based than plot-based. Overall, I gave the people of the Lonely Hearts Book Club 4 stars. My one fantasy read in the month of May was Dreamer's Pool by Juliet Marillier, and this was my first time reading from Juliet Marillier. I really didn't know what I was in for, what to expect. So first, fair warning, this is the first book in a trilogy, and they are quite short, a little over 440 pages. So Prince Orin is pledged to be married to a woman that he's never met before, but he grows to love her over their exchanging of letters. She has a very sweet, poetic voice in her letters, and he has a little portrait of her and her dog, and he can just tell from the painting that he has that she's a very sweet personality, very welcoming and warm, and he can't wait to meet her in person. Meanwhile, there is 2 characters that are sprung from jail with the condition that they don't take vengeance on the man who put them there until they've waited 7 years. And so yes, they're not in prison anymore, but also they can't exact revenge or right a wrong until after 7 years have passed. Set up home in a small village, Blackthorn continues her practice as a healer, and Grimm kind of picks up any heavy labor jobs that are needed around the village. Before too long though, they're drawn into a murder and missing persons case, and they put the clues together and solve the case. Well, when Oren's future bride finally arrives for the betrothal ceremony, which is just part one of the wedding, Oren discovers that she's a polar opposite to the person that he imagined in the letters and in the portrait. She doesn't act anything like that, in fact, which, you know, in modern times we would just say, you have been catfished. So Prince Oren notices that Blackthorn and Grimm were able to solve this other mystery, and so he decides to confide in them about his suspicions about his future bride. So we have those two storylines going, and we have just this really fun Watson and Holmes sort of dynamic between our two main characters. This story is fairly short, and it will keep you guessing till the end, and I'm really excited to pick up book 2. The next book I want to talk about is a Christian nonfiction that I read in May. You'll also recognize this one from our last video when we talked about cover design, and it's very pink. If you guessed it was this one, you are right. This book is called Finding the Hero in Your Husband by Dr. Julie Slattery, and it was actually, contrary to the cover, a really fantastic read. And I have to tell you that when I read books about Christian marriage, I go in squinting because I'm thinking like, is this going to apply outside of a contemporary urban white America, or is it going to actually be based on biblical principles and actual behavioral science? Because I really care about that. I want it to be founded in truth and evidence, not culture. That's kind of the worst. Especially with nonfiction, because you might not even get a whiff of that too early in the book, and then you'll find yourself in the middle and it will say something and you're just like, that's a red flag, and you've wasted your money on a book. I did not waste my money on this book. It was actually very true, very helpful, and even though I don't read a lot of nonfiction, and I definitely don't read a lot about marriage, I think that I would safely recommend this book if you're preparing to get married, or if you have been married for a short while, a long while, and feeling dissatisfied about where you're at right now. I think that this would be a good read for you. Dr. Julie Slattery, the author, has over 50 years of marriage behind her, and she also is very high up in her expertise in behavioral psychology. This book addresses some really important topics like your needs and wants as a person, boundaries in relationships, and how to deal with communication issues, expectations in marriage. Needless to say, I love this one. I gave it 5 stars. Couldn't be better, except the cover. I think just take my word for it. It's better than the cover. One new release that I picked up in the month of May and read is Happy Place by Emily Henry. It is a very bright cover. It is so fluorescent. This one was trending over BookTube over the last month, so I'm not going to waste your time by going too deep into the plot. We have the trope of friends to lovers to enemies to lovers. It's very confusing. We kind of had a lot of tropes all in this one story, and yet they really hinge on that central miscommunication problem that you usually see in the 3rd act of these sorts of books. And the miscommunication isn't limited to our central couple, but it also affects the characters around them. Let me explain. Harriet is more than excited to escape her stressful medical residency and escape with her friends to a luxurious vacation home in Maine for some cheese, wine, seafood, and good conversation. But when Harriet arrives at the house, Win is already there. He also has been invited, and he didn't want to share the news of their breakup with their friends, and so he just accepted the invitation. So you could say that we have a fake dating or a fake engagement trope, as our main couple has to pretend that they're still in love and excited to be married during this summer trip. My main issue with this story has to be the emotional immaturity of our characters. In previous Emily Henry books, we never really relied on miscommunication as the reason that a couple couldn't be together. That wasn't the main reason that their third act breakup happened. They were pretty good about communicating. We saw that they would be a good fit together, and that wasn't something that their relationship hinged on. This one kind of introduces that element and also applies it to all of the other characters. So there's quite a bit of resolution that needs to take place before we can have a satisfying ending. I gave Happy Place 3 stars. So that's a wrap on May. As always, I would love to hear your book recommendations in the comments. Let me know what you read in May that either became a new favorite or really made you think. I always appreciate your ideas for future videos. Speaking of, I've got some fun ideas for things that I can do this summer with you, and if you'd like to participate, we have a poll on the community tab. Scroll up on your YouTube page and click the community tab. You'll see that poll. I believe the last time I checked it, we were at a 60-40 split, and the leading idea was big books, reading your big books for the summer. So whether that be War and Peace, Les Mis, The Count of Monte Cristo, we're gonna tackle those books that we've been afraid to pick up, but we're also afraid to miss out on. And we're going to share with one another what those are, and then we're gonna come up with a strategy, we're gonna come up with a plan, and we're gonna encourage one another as we read through those books and talk about what we're learning, any obstacles that we're encountering, so that we can help lift each other through those. I think that'll be a fun time. The other option that I'm also just as much, if not more excited about, is a summer bingo card. And that's gonna be something that you can use whatever books you have on your own TBR, and you're gonna check off books that fall into a certain category, have a certain trope or theme, for you to track the variety that you go through this summer. So that's a go at your own pace. The points don't really matter. It's just more of a community activity. We get to share, like, hey, I got this book for this category. I think it works. There's no rules, the points don't matter, and it's summertime. We're on vacay mode. So none of these ideas are going to be like, oh, I'm not on track, I'm not doing it every week. It's not like that. It's very chill. It's gonna be fun. I so appreciate hearing from you, and I look forward to talking with you about books again soon.